Hello. Today we will be exploring the submissions area of the Propaganda Game website. Not only can visitors to the site play a single-player game where they can choose ahead of time what types of propaganda examples they wish to see, but players can actually create their own examples for other players to see in-game. We have found that creating your own examples is just as helpful in learning the various propaganda techniques as playing the game. An author need only do a Google search for campaign rhetoric or the gun debate or advertising scams, and he or she will find hundreds upon hundreds of memes on any given issue to use for a new example. Your example can contain text, an image, a video clip, or all three. Authors who have submitted examples for our database have all remarked at how creative the process is of finding materials for their example or finding examples themselves. The internet, TV, and everyday life offers a wealth of propaganda examples. So let's begin. After logging into the site, we'll first want to click the Submissions option at the top of the website. Doing so, we'll scroll the website down to the Submission section where we see a gentleman dressed in a suit and holding a microphone. Just underneath, there is a button labeled New Submission. Let's go ahead and click that. This takes us to the Submissions area page, where we find different sections labeled Step 1, Step 2, Step 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. In Step 1, we find the name and email fields. By default, the name and email will reflect your login information. If you would like your name associated with your submission, you will be given credit in the single-player version. Simply leave name and email blank if you wish to be anonymous. Your email address will not be shown in-game or to other players or given to anyone for any reason. Let's scroll down to Step 2. Step 2 is the only step that contains required fields, specifically the example text box and the technique used in your example. The example that I will be using at this time is one that contains only text. I'll paste my example in the Your Example text box. My example reads as followed. Sarah, I believe Jody. Clara, why? I mean, what makes you think she isn't misleading you? Sarah, because Jody is a very honest person. Now, I believe this is an example of begging the question. Begging the question is a technique found in the Maneuver section, so I will first select Maneuver in the section drop-down. As a result of selecting Maneuver, all the techniques for that section appear in the drop-down to the right in the technique list for that section. If I choose the Self-Deception section, all the techniques for self-deception appear in the technique drop-down. Okay, since my example includes a begging the question technique, I'm going to go ahead and choose that. And after choosing the technique that describes my example, just below the big text box for your example and your explanation, an example of the selected technique appears along with the definition of the selected technique. This is helpful if we need clarification on any given technique. Because I chose begging the question for my technique, we can see an example of begging the question here, and we can see the definition of begging the question here. So if I were to choose instead victory by definition, Then it would give me an example of victory by definition and the definition of victory by definition. So let me go ahead and put this back to begging the question again. Okay, so scrolling back up in the area where we find the words Step 2, we can find two links that create pop-ups for all sections and techniques and another for all spheres and category. This is much like a reference guide for those of us still learning the techniques or need to help narrow down which category our example fits into. No matter what technique you click on, in this case I've chosen Appeal to Pity, the definition of Appeal to Pity appears down at the bottom. And you can select any technique to see its definition. The same is true with the spheres and category. A pop-up will appear of all your categories, and a description of that category will appear at the bottom. Now that I have selected my technique, it's time to choose a sphere and category. The four spheres of life are politics, media, relations, and reflection. I believe my example fits into the reflection sphere of life, so I will choose it. As a result of choosing the reflection sphere, the category drop-down appears with the appropriate categories for the sphere I've chosen. In this case, I believe my example best exemplifies beliefs. The sphere and category are not required, but if you wish to give your example more detail, try your best to find a category that best describes your example. This will come into play and be helpful for other players that are looking for certain kinds of propaganda examples. In game, if I'm interested in finding examples that have to do with beliefs, my example will more likely appear to the player looking for examples that have to do with beliefs. The next area in Step 2 is the explanation text box. Here, I'll put any additional thoughts I may have about my example. I believe an additional thought I wish to convey is, Jody may be an honest person, but she may be misleading Sarah. So I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste that into the explanation text box. Jody may be an honest person, but she may still be misleading Sarah. In game, players have the ability to leave comments to the author with thoughts and even disagreements with the author's chosen technique. The very first comment in the dialogue will be the author's explanation. Further down in Step 2, we find a secondary and tertiary drop-down. If your example contains a second or third technique, you can choose them here. Many examples can have several techniques in them, but if you wish to focus on the most obvious technique in your example, simply leave these two drop-downs alone. The rest of the steps are very simple. In Step 3, we decide whether our example contains content that may be deemed inappropriate for ages 17 or below. Each submitted example is reviewed by an administrator here at the Propaganda website before it is added to the database. We do not shy away from controversial issues, but your example must not contain material that promotes any ideology. For example, your submission may include an image of a KKK rally with a quote from a Klan leader that may be an example of prejudice. But in the explanation area for your example, we would not allow you to condone white supremacy. No nudity will be approved as well. If you submit an example we choose not to approve, we will email you with our reason for refusal. Let's scroll down to Step 4. Step 4 is the image area. Simply drag and drop the image associated with your example onto the area that reads Drag Image File into this area. Or you can click Choose File to search your desktop or hard drive for an image you have already downloaded. There is also a link to a meme maker in the image area if you have an image that you would like to display text for. If an author uploads a picture of the Nike logo with the words "Just Do It," they would also want to type out the words "Just Do It" in the Your Example input text box in step 2. This is so players can find certain kinds of examples that they may be searching for easier. Because my example does not have an image, I will leave this area alone. Further down we see step 5. Step 5 is the keyword area, where we can enter as many keywords as we want that best helps clarify our example for searchability. For my example, I'm going to put honesty, lying, and misled. This will help players of the single-player game find this example if their interest is in seeing propaganda that is specific to honesty and lying and misleading. In step 6, we can paste video links from either YouTube or Vimeo. Many videos can be lengthy, so if our example were to occur between 2 minutes and 20 seconds in the video, we can specify exactly when the propaganda technique in our example occurs in the video link we posted. Our final consideration may or may not appear depending upon if we are students. If you elected to click the student checkbox during your initial sign up to the site, you will see a text box here where you can enter an assignment code that your teacher gave you to submit this example to. You can assign an example to multiple assignments by editing your example in the author's life list area. You may also edit your profile by clicking your name at the top right of any page on the site, then choosing Edit Profile to become a student if you forgot to do this during sign up. Finally, we upload our submission by clicking the Upload My Submission button. Having done so, we are sent to a Show Example page where we find a general description of our submitted example, including any text given for the example or explanation, any image uploaded, and details including the sphere, category, and section. The technique of the example and its definition appears here as well, along with keywords and secondary and tertiary techniques. Below your example, there are 3 circular icons. 2 of the 3 are Facebook icons where you can post your example to Facebook in 2 different ways. The first method is the blue Facebook icon, which will post your example to your wall. When your friends click on your post with your example, they will be taken to this example page where they will find your example. The white Facebook icon posts the same information to your wall, but upon clicking on your example, friends will see a list of all techniques and their definitions for them to try to figure out for themselves which technique is being used and reply to your post. After all responders have given their vote, you can give them your answer and open a dialogue about the example. You can also hover over an image in your example, if it has one, and pin the image to your Pinterest board. At the very bottom of this page, there is a Show All button and an Edit button. Or if you're ready to create a new example, you can click the New Submissions button. By clicking on the Show All button, you will be taken to your author's life list to view all your submitted examples. In your submission list, you can quickly show your example by clicking on its unique ID number under the example column or edit your example to change details easily. Remember that after we've approved your example, if you then edit and change your example, the example then becomes unapproved again and waiting approval. Generally, it only takes us 1 to 2 days to approve submissions. You may also delete an example if you're not fond of it. Another way to reach this submission list is by clicking on your name at the top right of any page on the site, and in the profile area, click on Author's Life List, and it will take you back to your list of submitted examples. Now, let's go back to the new submission area and enter a new example. Step 1 is already filled out for us, and this time I'm going to skip ahead briefly to the image area in step 4. I already have an image picked out for my new example. I'm going to drag my image off of the desktop and onto the area designated for images. Once I release the mouse, my image will appear on the page. I could have also clicked the Choose File button and searched my hard drive for the image. This image has a Coke and Pepsi can with boxing gloves engaged in combat. Now I'm going to go back to step 2 and pick a section and technique for my image. I believe this image best exemplifies the drawing the line technique, which is a technique of self-deception. After choosing the section and technique, I'm going to pick a sphere and category. It's obvious for this example that the sphere is media and the category is advertising. In the Your Example text box, I'm going to type See Image, letting the player know the example is in the image. So in this particular example, the image is much more significant than the text area or the explanation. For one thing, the Your Example text box is a required field. You want to type something in here, and See Image will direct the player to the image, and my explanation is very simple, and so is the advertisement, Coke or Pepsi. Scrolling down to step 5, I'm going to choose a few keywords. And in this case, I believe I'm going to just type Coke, Pepsi, and maybe commercial, and that's fine. Okay, so although it's not necessary for this example, I'm going to go to YouTube and grab a Pepsi versus Coke blind taste test just to spice my example up a little bit. And I'm going to paste that link right in this text field. Okay, so that's it. I'm going to hit the Upload My Submission button. And I've created another example. And once I've submitted my example, we arrive back at the show page for our example, where we can see our example and explanation text, the image, details of our example, including sphere, category, and section, and also our video. Now at the very bottom of this page, here's our video. At the very bottom of this page, we find Show All and Edit. The Show All will take us back to our author's life list. This can also be reached by clicking your name at the very top right of any page. So let's go ahead and click Show All. This takes us to our author's life list, where we can see on page 2, I have my new example that I can either show by clicking on the ID number, or I can edit if I want to change anything in my example. So I'm going to go ahead and show. And once again, if you hover over any image in your example, a Pinterest icon will appear where you can click and pin this image to your Pinterest board. This is best done with images that have text on them to show the person the exact propaganda technique that's being used in the image. And at any time on any page, usually you will find a new submission button if you're in the process of creating several submissions, several examples. You can go right into the next one and begin the process over again. Okay, so I believe the only other thing that I want to convey is at the top of the submission area, you can find a Show Expert version of the submission tool. If you click on this, you'll find a version of the submission tool that's a whole lot simpler. This might be a better alternative for submissions because you can just breeze right through this. There's only a few fields and you can go from one to the other really quick. So this concludes this tutorial on how to use the submission tool. Click the bell below this video to get a notification for new videos as we release them.